I'm getting a listing with that's a property that's tenant occupied. And
Yeah.
how do you guys, so like right now I spoke with the tenant, the seller, and all that. Like, how do you work with making sure the tenant is on board, the transition of the sale? Like, how do you structure that? Like, I talked to her yesterday, but just like, how do you make sure like everybody's on the same page and get the job done? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, tenants are a tough thing, right? If they are somewhat difficult to, deal with, I usually show up right away, first meeting, with a bottle of wine or whatever they like, and with a thank you card, and to really build that relationship with the tenants so that you're on their side first and foremost, and make sure that their lives aren't interrupted as we go about selling the property.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it may need to be like once a week in a window of 1 hour. And next week it had to be the same. And however, if you price it right, that 1 hour window, you may be able to get multiple groups to come in and actually sell it, right? So it really depends. Like if you have an overpriced listing, it's going to be difficult anyway. But if you have it priced right and, you start to build that relationship with the tenant, it becomes an easier conversation. And obviously it has to be set up first and foremost, some coaching with the client to let the tenant know that their lives won't be disrupted as they think it would be. And just make it as easy and as painless as possible on both the seller and the tenant. And that comes through conversations, comes through a lot of communication with both sides, right? So it's a lot of heavy lifting in the beginning, but once you get into the groove of it, it should be fine. I hope that helps. Mr. Ireland, what are your thoughts on this, on tenanted properties?
Wow, you just read the thesis on how to get a tenant to cooperate in the sale of the property. And so don't make the mistake I did in the early days where I came in from a position of, authority, and I'm the new listing agent, the new sheriff in town, because, tenants, if they're not on side, will leave, cereal bowls on the counter and laundry on the floor and not be too accommodating and come up with all kinds of excuses. So rather than to kind of come up with the, read them the riot act, to your point, John, I like that idea, is just smoke the peace pipe with the tenant up front. Let's say, in effect, say, look, I want to be considerate that, these showing requests could be really inconvenient and disruptive for you. So what I'd like to do is, if you can tell me times that would be convenient for you, I'll do our very best to make that happen. Like if you tell me, no showings before 11 in the morning because, I don't want to be disruptive to you, and just let them know that, we're being considerate around that. And then also we do, every time there's a showing request, make sure the landlord or the owner gets copied on all the emails. And we had just one recently where the tenant was a little difficult. So when they denied showings inside that 24-hour window, we all the emails are copied to the seller, and then the seller gets involved. But definitely, it's a collaborative effort. I like to kind of indicate to the tenant there's a possibility that there could be an investor that purchases a property and may just want to inherit them. And, we'll do our best to facilitate that.
Yeah, great advice. And, I would also go further to that, as Michael said, is when you document anything with the tenant, always copy the seller on it. So then there's no relaying messages back and forth. And he said, she said, when it gets messy, it's really not that workable. So copy everybody on any sort of communication, text or email. Hope that helps. Aaron, tenanted properties.
Yeah, what about them?
Yeah. How do you navigate around that if the tenant's going to be difficult? What do you do in a tenanted property situation?
Yeah, so the first thing we do is really ask a series of detailed questions to the owner, right? So, my intention in asking these questions, Michael, is not to be nosy. It's really just to determine how I can best be of assistance and help you, facilitate your goals and objectives quickly and efficiently. So in terms of the tenant situation, is there currently a lease in place? Is it month to month? What's the dynamic?
Month to month.
Okay. And then I'm wondering, do you guys have a good working relationship with each other? Like, do you see them kind of being very cooperative, or do you see them, perhaps resisting the process a little bit?
They've been good. I mean, they were late a couple of times, and they've been there for 3 years, but they were always good in making up, and they seem to take good care of the place.
Okay, excellent.
I don't
And
think
then,
they're going to be too happy with the fact that, we're selling though, because I think market rent is like $3,000 a month now, and they're only paying, I think, 2,500.
sure. Yeah, that's common, when a homeowner like yourself decides to sell. It creates a little bit of friction for the tenant. At the same time, our intention is to mitigate that as much as possible. And I'm wondering, have you mentioned to them already that your intention is to sell? Have you had that conversation, or is your goal and objective to have me, initiate that conversation with them?
Yeah, I've informed them. We gave them the, kind of the heads up on the email, and they acknowledge that.
Okay, so they acknowledged it. So good. So we're all clear. And again, I just want to be as clear as possible. So, our intention first and foremost is to help you net the most and do it quickly and efficiently. What's also true, being that there is a month-to-month lease in place, we really want to make this process as smooth and efficient, because we require their cooperation in order to get, as much as we possibly can for the home. So what I'm going to do, Michael, now that you've authorized a listing agreement, is I'm going to reach out to them on your behalf. I'll just inform them that you've hired me for the job of helping, to sell the property. And then I'll let them know, like, our intention is to make this process as smooth and efficient as possible for them and as convenient as possible. And I'm going to give them a couple options. Now, prior to giving them options, I'd like to discuss with you what those options are, so you can let me know what your preference would be. Would that be okay?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So one option is it's by like appointment only in terms of the showing. So in other words, myself or staff or a third party that we have called Showing Time will reach out to them when somebody wants to see the property, whether it's text, email, phone call. And if we do not hear back from them, then the showing will not happen. So they have to actually confirm the showing themselves. The second option is where it's a courtesy. So in other words, we utilize those same mechanisms. We reach out, and if they don't get back to us, then they've had the heads up and somebody's going to come. So I guess in terms of what you want, and that's what's most important, which one of those would be your preference?
Well, I because we do want to get this sold to move our capital. So I just don't want a situation where they start saying no to showings, and whatever the law is, I think we got to give them like 24 hours notice or something.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
kind of want to. Yeah, I mean, unless it's like somebody's got like COVID or something.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, so then what we'll do is I'll present it to them that way and just let them know, like, here's the way that we typically, we'll do it. And they'll give them at least 24-hour notice prior to showing. And we will give them a courtesy, either call, email, or text. I'll find out what their preference is. And what I'm going to do as well is the program that we use, Showing Time, it allows me to ensure that you get an email notification every time that a request is made. Would you like that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you keep me plugged into that. Thanks.
Yeah. And then what we'll do is we'll keep you kind of abreast of the situation. So if I see, and again, my intention isn't to be like a tattletale or anything. At the same time, if I see that showings are being restricted in some way, then I can reach out to you, and together as a team, we can come up with a strategy as far as, communication with them or what we need to do to ensure that we get their cooperation. Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate that. I mean, again, they're nice people, but I know if I was in their shoes, I wouldn't be too happy about the situation.
Yeah, exactly. So my experience is you get more bees with honey, sort of thing, so that'll be our first inclination. I never want people to confuse kindness with weakness, though. So, we will lead with honey, and I'll keep you abreast of the situation. If anything comes up that requires your attention, then I'll let you know. And together as a team, we'll make this happen for you. Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Aaron. Thanks.
Hey, my pleasure. And again, I appreciate the opportunity on your business, and make it a great day. And then I'm done. So I go through a series of questions to find out the nature of the relationship that Michael has with the tenant, if he's had a conversation with them ahead of time, if he got any pushback when he had the conversation, if he perceives to be any pushback. And based on what he shared with me, it sounds like it's more likely not going to be fine. And then I walk him through the options that we have, and then let him know that he'll be emailed on every single, request. And that's an easy thing if you use a program like Showing Time. And then if I see anything that causes any, that requires his attention in terms of friction with the tenant and them not, providing access, then I just let them know and we come up with a solution.
Boom.
Awesome.
Hey,
All
I'm
right.
just going to bring Jose around with me all the time. So every time I speak, he'll just pop his head out and be like, boom.
Now, the reason I'm saying boom is because you can tell that you've had these situations probably hundreds, if not hundreds of times. So the approach that you're, when you were going through it, I'm like, this is exactly what I would do. I would be having a conversation with the landlord first to find out what the actual situation is. And then based on that, I would make a recommendation. Now, here's the only things that I would add to that. So like, for example, if they say I haven't given notice to the tenant, now what I typically do is I try to be strategic as to when to give notice to the tenant. So if I give the tenants a 60-day notice right when I'm about to put the property on the market, what does the tenant start to do? They start to freak out and they start to think, man, like, am I going to be homeless? And homeless is one of those human needs, like food, water, shelter, is like one of those human needs. So you're attacking like one of their, like, oh my God, am I going to be homeless? So what we like to do is, if the owner is not in a rush to sell the property, we don't give notice until we receive an offer, and we don't give notice until contingencies are removed. No, wait, not that. If the owner is not in a rush and he's concerned about missing out on rent, meaning he doesn't want a vacant property, then we give notice after contingencies are removed, and then we coordinate the close of escrow at around that time. Typically, if they're not in a rush, we'll give notice either when contingencies are removed, or we'll give notice when an offer is accepted. Now, you can give notice immediately. Just know that the tenant, when you give notice immediately, he's going to start freaking out right away. A good portion of the time, their brain is going to go into survival, and they're going to think like, "Oh my God, like how much time do I have to move?"
Yeah.
The other thing
I'm glad
Uh-huh.
you're absolutely right, Jose. And the other thing that I didn't mention when I was talking, like when I would actually, because that was just a conversation with seller. When I have a conversation with a tenant, I'd be like, yeah, and just so you know, so that way you can manage time frames in your mind. It usually takes like maybe 30 to 45 days once we put it on the market to get an acceptable offer, and then another 30 to 45 days to close. So I would plan for you personally, like in the next 90 to 120 days, to have your next living situation, lined up. I guess I'm curious, will you need any help or assistance with finding the next destination? And then be quiet. Because then you're perceived to be like, which is true. Like, I'm being helpful. I'm not like this like bad guy. I'm like just trying to help you out. And oftentimes they'll be like, no, don't worry about it. Like, we already have that under control. It's like, okay, great. Well, just so you know, if you do need any help or assistance, like we can help facilitate that. And they're like, okay, I appreciate that,
And I think most agents look at tenants as a problem versus like, hey, look, they're experiencing a certain life event that is life-changing for them. How can I make this a more pleasant experience for them? And how can I help them in whatever their concerns are to basically get them to their next destination? You guys are forgetting that some of these tenants eventually, like I've had tenants that basically like, dude, you basically helped the owner sell the property. 5 years later, hey, I want to buy a property. Like, they come back to us because they remember how we didn't make it like a bad experience for them. The other thing I was going to say is another part of the conversation that you could have, like if the owner says, hey, look, the tenant may not be cooperative, or I'm a little bit concerned. One of the options is that we could offer some sort of relocation assistance as well, too, negotiated up front with the landlord. So now, and the second part of this, we're going to talk about how to have that conversation with the tenant, because I think that conversation is important, very important with the tenant, and you have to have it in a certain manner. There's a couple of different things that come to mind as it relates to that. So in some cases, a landlord, if they feel that the tenant's going to be uncooperative, they can offer some sort of relocation assistance, sometimes a month, sometimes 2 months, which basically you go back to the tenant and said, hey, look, the landlord wants to help you out. In order to help you out, they've offered some relocation assistance. Now, this is the way that the relocation work. It would be X amount of dollars. It would be X amount of your deposit. here are the requirements in order to get the relocation assistance. In order to get this relocation assistance, we have to remain in the property until the date that it closes, meaning you have to vacate your move right around. You have to continue paying. You have to remove all your personal items, and you have to cooperate with any showings, any inspections, and any appraisals. If you're able to do that at the date of move out, you get X amount of dollars, basically. And having that conversation with the tenant. The other thing is, I don't reach out to the tenant. Like if the owner tells me, Jose, I want you to reach out to the tenant, I don't reach out to the tenant until the landlord lets them know that I'm going to reach out to them. There is nothing worse than calling a tenant that is not expecting your call, that does not know who you are, and letting them know that the property is being sold.
Yeah. So what that would sound like is, let's say when I was asking Michael, like, hey, have you already notified the tenant, had a conversation with them? He's like, no. It's like, all right, well, in my professional experience, it's super helpful if you were to just reach out to them and let them know to expect my call.
100%.
You know, and as such, they're much more receptive to it versus kind of being caught off guard. Does that make sense? And they're like, yeah, that makes sense. Right. And Jose's point about viewing them not as a nuisance, but like as just like humans who are going through a challenge is critically important. And, you know, there's a saying that says, like, you can tell the character of somebody based on how they treat people that can do nothing for them. So, you know what I mean? Like, you're just demonstrating. And what Jose said too, where he became aware, I mean, he's had these conversations all the time, but, you know, let's say Michael he's a homeowner, he hasn't had these conversations all the time. Based on the quality of the questions that I'm asking and the logical nature of those questions, Michael immediately in his mind is like, oh, he knows what he's doing. Like 100%, because I'm asking questions that, like, sometimes Michael hasn't even thought of. They're like, oh yeah, like I hadn't even thought of that. You know what I mean? And you're just systematically going down a list of first what's true for him, then what's true for the tenant. And then the way that I would describe it. So let's say Michael would have said to me, like, yeah, like I mentioned it to the tenant and I think he's going to be a problem. Okay. Well, what I'm aware of is that, you know, my professional experience with this is that there's two approaches. Okay. The first is honey. And what honey would look like, Michael, is something that is where we're really trying to accommodate them, and perhaps even like money, where we say to them, hey, here's some closing cost assistance to help you with your next destination. What's also true, Michael, is we tie that to particular behaviors that we want them to execute on. So 1, you have to continue to keep paying. 2, you have to, you know, leave the property in good working condition. 3, you have to be out by, you know, the time frame that we tell you, and so on and so forth. And then, you know, what's also true though is, you know, sometimes, and it's really the outlier, Michael, it's not the rule, it's really the exception. On the rare exception that honey doesn't work, then what follows honey is a hammer. And what a hammer would look like is the following. And then you explain to them the process of going through a writ of possession, whether that's an ejection, an eviction, you know, like an unlawful detainer, you know, whatever the particular legal course you're going to take to get them out. And then I would preface that by saying, like, look, you know, we don't want people to confuse kindness with weakness. So what follows behind honey is a hammer. And here are the options that you have from a legal perspective, being that there's a lease in place and it's month to month, and then you can tell them what that is. Now, I want to be clear, Michael, that's the last ditch option. You know, we're not going to really utilize that unless it was 100% necessary, because I'm aware it causes, you know, internal emotional consternation and, you know, some resources involved and stuff like that. You know, at the same time, if we have to do it, we'll do it. Does that make sense to you? And he's like, yeah, that makes total sense. And what I'm doing there is I'm equipping Michael up front with what he needs to make executive decisions. And if you think about yourself, when I'm making a big executive decision, I just need the appropriate information. I might pull in a professional to ask them really quick what they think, if they're a professional in that area and they have specialized knowledge in that area, and then I will decide. So Michael, if his tenant is being difficult, he probably is worried about it and concerned. So when I'm like, yo, here are the options that we have and here's what we're going to execute, we do this all the time, and I lay that out quickly, it alleviates that stress for him. And he's like, okay, I'm very clear on what my options are, and I'm clear the order of operations that we're going to move down those options, you know, and depending on how the tenant responds is what we'll end up doing.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to add is in that time frame, because we've had a couple of tenants that don't cooperate. So what I started doing up front with the landlord is like, look, like we're going to try to do everything with honey, like Aaron said. If for whatever reason the tenant becomes uncooperative, I like to have your permission to have a talk with the tenant and let them know what could happen if they continue to be uncooperative or if they don't allow us to show the property. And then at that point, you go over like basically like, hey, look, the owner has like if you just keep that in your back pocket, if the tenant ever becomes uncooperative, then you have a talk with the tenant where you start posting 24-hour notice. And if they still don't show, you have a talk with them like, look, I'm trying to work with you. At the same time, if this continues to happen, the owner has given us permission to actually move forward with the legal process of an unlawful detainer. Just so you know, we're very close to that process. So unless we start getting cooperation, basically, we're going to move forward with that.
Yeah,
process.
and I need you to know, like, my intention in telling you that is not to be like threatening or to be overly aggressive. I just want you to be clear on what the next steps are.
But that's in your back pocket.
Yeah. So if you notice it, like if people start to get like, you know, like belligerent or aggressive, you're like, hey, what I'm aware of is I'm just the messenger. You know, my intention isn't to, I'm not the enemy here. Like I'm really actually trying to help you facilitate this. So what I'd like to do is share with you some information in hopes that doing so can help you to get the clearest picture of this dynamic and how it could potentially end up, you know, kind of working itself out. So that way you can decide what you feel is best, and whatever you decide, you know, is fine. I'm like, okay, well, so there's one of two options. One is cooperation, and with cooperation can come some compensation. The second option is if you resist, here's what will happen. X, Y, and Z. And we do this all the time. So the end result will be is you will have to leave the property and da, 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 da. So either one's okay. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Based on what you're looking to accomplish or why, like, what do you think makes the most sense for you and your family?
The other thing I was going to say is if they say, well, I've already talked to the tenant, even though they've already talked to the tenant, you still want to call, or somebody from your office wants to call the tenant and introduce yourself to them and clarify any questions that they may have. And if they haven't talked to the tenant, encourage the owner to only let them know that they will be selling, not to go into any details, and to leave the details up to you. And
Yes.
The reason is that because owners are a lot more emotional in this process, they may say things that aren't accurate, or they may get emotional. If the tenant gets angry, they may say, well, we're going to evict you, or something that could ruin the sale. So what I always do is, like, I always try to take that off their plate and put it on our plate, because our office has a lot more experience with that. We do that 10 to 20 times in a year. So we encourage them, like if they're like, look, well, we haven't had the conversation. Can I make a recommendation? Allow us to have the recommendation, or allow us to have the conversation with them. The only thing I would need from you is for you to notify them that I will be reaching out to them, and just let them know that you've decided to sell and that your real estate agent is going to call them to explain how the process is going to work. Would you be open to that?
Yeah. And I want everybody on this call to like really get clear. I think most agents just think that the only value that they're going to add is by putting it on the market and selling it. No,
this is
managing the tenant.
So many listings because I have experience in dealing with tenant-occupied properties.
Yes, I'm telling you, bro. So this, everything that me and Jose are describing right now is part of the value proposition that you can provide to a homeowner who has a tenant, because you have specialized knowledge. You know, you are intellectually intelligent and emotionally intelligent. You know what questions to ask. You know how procedurally, how to structure it, where, like Jose's saying, don't let them like be like, hey, just so you know, moving forward, we found that, you know, by us taking this off of your shoulders and you directing any questions with regards to the property and the sale to us, it really allows us to be able to serve you better and take some pressure off of your shoulders. So moving forward, you know, if you did that, that would be great. And they're like, okay, fine. So this is part of the value that you're adding above and beyond helping them to sell their property. So don't view it as like, oh, I'm just like doing this like little thing to like, you know, deal with this pesky tenant. No. This is part of the reason why the seller's hiring me to help them with the sale.
And this is so important as well, too, because if you manage the tenant situation correctly, it will lead to a paycheck. If you don't manage the tenant situation correctly, it will lead to an expired listing, and it will lead to a paycheck for me or Aaron, basically, because we would have been calling those expired, basically. You know?
Yeah, and I'm cool with that, but I prefer you guys,
I would
lock it
prefer
down.
you guys do it. Now, the other thing that we usually have, so if a landlord is concerned about misrents, you will come across a situation where a landlord is not very cash flow rich. He's asset rich, but doesn't have much disposable income. And he's concerned that if the tenant moves out or the tenant stops paying rent, that he is going to not be able to make the mortgage payment. So in those cases, you don't want to spook the tenant out where they basically start to move out right away, because that basically puts the landlord in a situation where they've got a lot of pressure on them now because they can't afford to make the payment. So I usually have a conversation with the owner, just letting them know, look, this is how we're going to keep the tenant calm. We're going to let the tenant know that that just because we're selling the property, that doesn't mean that they have to move out right now. We're going to let them know that we're going to do everything we can to try to find an investor to buy the property, and that the owner is actually giving preference to any investors as long as their offer is within reason with a retail offer. If their offer is within reason, the owner has given us permission to give preference to those investors, because there's a chance that those investors may want to keep the tenant in place. Now, here's the thing about that strategy. We won't know what type of buyer is going to come until we get the property on the marketplace and until we start showing the property, basically. Now, once we start showing the property and we receive offers, then at that point, we'll know what type of offer it's going to be. So it doesn't make sense for us to give notice immediately. It makes more sense for us to give notice after we put it on the market and after we start to receive offers. Then at that point, we'll know what type of person is going to be buying the property, whether it's going to be an owner-occupied person or if it's going to be an investor. If it's an investor, we can talk to the investor to see if they would consider keeping the tenant. If it's a owner-occupied person, then at that point, we would give the tenant a minimum of a 60-day notice, and we would work with the tenants to make sure that they have enough time to vacate. But either way, we're going to work with them. We're not just going to hit them with something like random, like a 60-day notice, without having a conversation with them and without like understanding their needs, and we'll work for them, basically.
And I want you guys to be clear. There's two people in the world. Okay. Some people think they have to be very combative and difficult in order to be productive. So they try to use force. And what I'm aware of is that works to a certain degree, but it's very, very limiting. It's a low level of influence. There's other individuals in the world who recognize that through collaboration and working together and you can accomplish a lot more, bro. So I know some of you guys have given access to your thinking to people that are like very combative in nature. So they teach you to be combative. I'm just telling you that that's like a low vibration. It's a lower level of influence, and you can accomplish much, much more by being caring and considerate and like compassionate for other people.
And it will very likely lead to negative 5-star reviews on your Google profile from a tenant.
Yeah.
Because they love to do that, just so you know. Tenants, if they feel like you didn't help, they love to leave negative reviews on Google profiles, even though obviously they're not the owner of the property, but they love to do that. The other thing I would say is, on all of my first visits with tenant-occupied properties, I take pictures and I take a video, even though they're not professional or that. Why do I do that? I am assuming worst case scenario right off the bat. I do a walkthrough of the property. I'm taking pictures and I'm taking a video. I am assuming that at some point they will become uncooperative and will not allow me to take pictures and will not allow me to show the property. Now, could I still get a property on the marketplace if I have pictures from my iPhone? Yes, I can. Could I still basically get a property sold if I have a very detailed video of the property and I price it very well? Could I still get the property sold? Yes, we did that during the pandemic, where we were able to do that, and people became uncooperative and basically said that they weren't going to basically allow us to show the property. But I assume worst case scenario. I plan for worst case scenario, and I hope and I strive for best case scenario.
Yeah, so you guys could write this like saying down as, if you want peace, prepare for war. So just being prepared for it. And again, it just demonstrates your level of professionalism. And you could even share that with, like if I'm talking to Michael, so what's going to happen is after I have this conversation, I'm going to do an in-person kind of meet and greet with the tenant. And again, just reinforce what we've discussed, that our intention is to make this as smooth and efficient as possible for them and as convenient as possible, because there will be a little bit of inconvenience, but as convenient as possible. What I'm also going to do on your behalf is to just take with my phone. They're not going to be the pictures that we put up on the market, but just take with my phone some pictures and a video. And the reason why I'm doing this is so that way we can document what the property looked like prior to them vacating. Does that make sense to you? And they're going to be like, bro, that's amazing. Like, that's awesome. You know what I mean? And that's our way of really preparing for, we're hoping for the best, but we're prepared for the worst. And I just want you to be clear, the probability that it ends up being the worst is very, very small. Happens like 1 out of 50 times. At the same time, I know an ounce of preparation is worth of, a pound of trying to figure it out down the road. So, that's something that we'll be doing. And I'll send you the pictures. My staff will in the video after I've done the walkthrough. Sound good? And they're like, this is amazing.
Now, what this shows is it shows professionalism, and it shows that you understand the process as well, too. Meaning, like, you already know that there's a chance that the tenant may become uncooperative, and you're preparing for that. The other thing that I would encourage all of you guys to do is whenever you do get a professional photographer, always take a Matterport 3D tour with tenant-occupied properties. Why? Because on a Matterport 3D tour, one, obviously you want to make this a more pleasant experience. So you can basically make it a requirement for agents or clients to view the Matterport 3D tour before getting access to the property. What that will do is it'll just make it so that people actually see the floor plan and you're getting more interested buyers. What it'll also do, if you're editing the pictures, I've had to edit tenant occupied pictures, and basically they look great, but once they actually take the tour, they're like, oh my God, this looks horrible. I want to make sure that the buyers in the marketplace can see what it actually looks like, so that we're not scheduling showings from people that are not going to make an offer or are very unlikely to make an offer on the property. So we want to make sure that they're able to see that, basically. So I always do that on all my tenant occupied properties. I feel like it makes it a more pleasant experience for the tenants. It basically makes it so that tenants are not being disturbed unnecessarily makes it so that tenants are not being disturbed unnecessarily, basically.
The last thing that I'll say about this, to make people like completely aware, I find it very interesting that this started off as a role play of like talking to a landlord. And what it proceeded to go down is a funnel of all of this additional information, all of these other mental maps of sequentially in our minds, the way me and Jose walk through a process, like an SOP. So, if it's not worth doing for a decade, it's not worth doing for a day. What you're seeing is the culmination of thousands of conversations like this. I've sold 2,000 properties in my career. Jose sold 1,000. So
close to 1,000.
Oh, my bad.
We're 103 away.
Yeah.
Which
right.
will
be
by next
and
year.
You're like another, what is that? 900 away, 1,000 away from me. I don't know. So, but the idea is like, if you're going to go down this path of being a professional real estate agent, think about it in your mind. So like, let's say somebody steps up right now and they're like, hey, I want to role play expireds. We can role play it. And then you know what's going to lead to? This whole funnel of all of this additional information, like boom, 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 right? All of this additional information that you have to think about when dealing with that particular lead source. Then somebody says, hey, I want to role play probates. Great. We have a conversation about probate. And guess what? You're going to get a torrent of all this other additional information in terms of process and procedure. Somebody says, hey, I want to role play prequal. Great. We'll role play the prequal. And guess what? You're going to get a whole nother torrent of all this other additional information. So there's these probably 5 conversations that you need to master to become a dominant listing agent. Setting appointments and all the various different lead sources on how to do it. Like, the different conversations within setting appointments, expired, probates,
different situations with
and the different situations that pop up, tenants, all that stuff. Then prequal, then the actual presentation itself, then handling objections, then closing. Those are 5 different conversations that you need to master to become a world-class presenter and a world-class salesperson who happens to sell real estate, right? And within each one of those is not just the words. So I hope everybody recognizes the reason why we go into so much detail after like role playing is my goal and Jose's goal and objective and John's and everybody else is to really have you understand what's happening underneath, the why behind it. It's more important for you to know why you're doing what you're doing than what you're doing.
It's like if I told you like, oh, like take 3D picture, take a 3D tour, but didn't give you an explanation as to why, you wouldn't really understand, oh, the chances of the tenant becoming uncooperative are very high. Oh, we want to make this a more pleasant experience for the tenant as well, too, basically. So now it comes down to the tenant conversation, basically. Now that obviously you kind of had that conversation with the landlord, understand that process, now it's talking to the tenant, and this is what it looks like with the tenant. So basically now you reach out to the tenant. Hi, Mr. Tenant. My name's Jose Morales. Mr. John Smith asked that I give you a call. He decided to sell the property and wanted to, I've been hired as a real estate agent, and he wanted me to reach out, introduce myself, and answer any questions that you may have, and also answer any questions about the process. Is there any questions that you have for me or anything that you may need clarification to help this make a smoother and easier process for you? Very first question that you're likely going to get, what do you guys think it is? Type it in the chat box. I know the very first question that I think that I'm going to get. Type it in. And I'll tell you guys what the very first question typically is going to be. I'll just let you guys know it. It's going to be, how much time do I have to move out? That's going to be the very first question typically that you get. How much time do I have to move out? Now, that depends on your conversation with the landlord. That depends if the landlord has already given notice or not. Like I said, I typically don't like to give notice until we start to receive offers, if there's some flexibility with the landlord, because that's, in my opinion, it adds this pressure right away to the tenant, and it makes it so that the tenant's concerned about moving out and starts boxing up items, and a lot of times it becomes an overwhelming process for them, basically. So if that's the case, this is how I would present it to the tenant. So just so you know, I don't want you to get scared because they're selling the property. I don't want you to freak out. The very first question that tenants usually ask me is, how much time do I have to move out? Just so you know, from the time we put the property on the marketplace, it's going to be roughly about 30 days to get an offer, and then another 30 to 60 days to potentially close it. Now, this is the way that the process would work, or this is the way that the owner has given me permission to do it. The owner would like for you to stay in the property. They would like for you to continue renting. So they've actually given me the right to give preference to investor buyers over a primary user. Now, what that's telling us is that we're going to be marketing the property to see if an investor can buy it, to see if they're willing to keep you as a tenant. If an investor is willing to keep you as a tenant, then there may not be a need for you to ever move out. Now, if an owner-occupied person wants to buy the property, then at that point you would need to move out. But just so you know, at that point, if an owner-occupied person wants to move into the property, we would reach out to you. We would let you know what type of closing time they want, and then we would work with you depending on what type of closing time you want. Just so you know, the minimum requirement that we have to give you by law is a 60-day, because you've been in the property for longer than a year, just so you know. So it won't ever be less than 60 days. Now, here is an incentive for you. In order for us to try to find an investor buyer, here is what investor buyers are going to be looking for. Investor buyers are going to be looking for tenants that are cooperative. So for example, if we reach out to you and we tell you, hey, look, somebody wants to show the property, and you basically say, hey, I'm not available today, I'm not available tomorrow, I'm not available until next week, just so you know, that's going to reduce the chances of us being able to find an investor buyer, because they are going to look at that as a red flag, and they're going to look at like, hey, look, if I inherit this tenant might not be cooperative moving forward, and they may be less inclined to want to keep you as a tenant. So my recommendation to you, if you want to stay in the property, my recommendation would be to stay as flexible as you possibly can with the showings, because investor buyers are going to be looking for that. The second thing that investor buyers look for whenever they're taking a property with a tenant in place, they take a look at cleanliness and how cleanliness the tenant is. Now, obviously, I understand that you have stuff in the property. I'm not asking you to move everything, but the more well-maintained the property is during this process, the higher the likelihood of a investor buyer wanting to keep you around, the higher the chances of those are. Do you understand this? Yes. Do you have any questions for me? Now, worst case scenario, just so you know, if an owner user wants to buy the property, we can actually help you find a property for lease. So just so you know, we're not going to blindside you. We're not going to basically throw like curveballs at you. Our goal would be to communicate with you. Our goal would be to keep you up to date. And our goal would be to work with you to help make this transition an easier transition for you, shall it come to that. Do you have any questions for me? No, I don't. Or
that's how it's done, son.
Or they may ask you some questions. Will I get my deposit back? That'll be something that you can talk to the owner in that relocation conversation, that relocation assistance conversation. Hey, look, the owner has actually given me the right to promise you your full deposit if you cooperate with all showings and you cooperate with everything, basically. And now here's another thing with a landlord. Sometimes a landlord will tell you, well, look, I want to give the tenant an incentive to cooperate with us. So here's what I decided to do. What I decided to do is I decided to give them a $500 discount on the rent every single month. Is that a good idea or is that a bad idea?
Bad.
That is a horrible idea. Why? Because think about incentives. Incentives drive behavior. So for example, if I'm incentivizing you with lower rent, do you want to move out? No. If I am incentivizing you with the reward up front without you delivering, is that reward system in alignment with behavior that I want? No, it's actually not. So if I hear that from a landlord, I would say something like, can I make a recommendation? I would not give the incentive up front, because now we're incentivizing them to do the wrong behavior. Think about this, Mr. Landlord. If we're giving them $500 discount in rent, what are the odds that they're going to want to move out and find a place that is even more expensive in rent? Very unlikely. So here's what I would recommend instead. Instead of giving them the reward up front, let's give them the reward at the end. Meaning, if they ever stop cooperating, you don't have to give them the reward, and you're dangling the carrot at the very end. So it makes sure that they cooperate with us all the way to the finish line. Why is that important? Do tenants ever start off good and then become uncooperative? 100%. 100% it happens. So this way, you're basically aligning it so that now if you do it this way, the process will be a lot smoother for you guys than if you do it a different way. If you do it a different way, the chances of you running into issues with tenants become very high, and then become very high of it becoming an expired listing because you didn't take pictures in the video of the property. You didn't take the 3D tour. You're not having buyers watch the 3D tour before they go into the property. You're not talking to the landlord up front, setting expectations. This is the last thing I would probably say with this. You want to understand your tenant laws in whichever area or demographic that you're in, because that'll allow you to know what options you have. So in my area, it's 60 days if they've been in the property for longer than a year. It's 30-day notice if they've been in it for less than a year. And if it's Section 8, it's a 90-day notice, not a 60-day notice. If it's Section
Jose, sorry to interrupt. Fun fact for your Canadian compadres. So now it's 90 days in Canada notice. It actually was 4 months and they rolled it back to 90 days. And so, yeah, you're wise to have the owner consult the landlord tenancy branch and appraise themselves of what their rights are, which in Canada, they basically have no rights.
Which is very important. So one of the things that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to find out, what are the laws in my area? Basically, what do those look like? And basically that way, this will help you have more educated conversations with landlords and to be able to guide landlords in what needs to happen and to have the proper resources. Like I have an eviction attorney that I call all the time. I'm like, hey, I haven't experienced this situation. What about this? What if they don't have a lease? What happens if they don't have a lease? Also, like, what happens if the tenant doesn't want to open the door? Can we force our way in there? You know? No, you can't. So, it's funny. Like, well, the tenant has to give you like access to the property if you give them a 24-hour notice. Nope, they don't have to. They can literally stand in front of the door and say, "You're not coming in," and you cannot force your way in there, even if you have a 24-hour notice in California. You will get in major trouble if you do that.
Or you can come to Florida and do whatever you want.
Yeah, in Florida, like Chairman Mao says, the truest authority is spoken out of the mouth of a gun barrel.
Mm-hmm. Hey guys, what happened to Honey, guys? What happened to Honey? Come on.
Yeah. Work with Honey first, but know what a hammer is what Jose's saying. So we work with Honey. We're demonstrating Honey. We're demonstrating how to position stuff. We're demonstrating how to think through incentives because it shapes behavior. We're having this conversation that this is part of the value that you're adding to a seller. It's part of your value stack. And what Jose's also saying is, know what a hammer is. Know what it actually is in your geographic area. So that way you can speak intelligently about it and you can guide them through procedurally. Here are the step-by-step things that you need to know and that we would do in the event we need to use it.
Now, Teddy Lim said this is a great way to pivot and set up the tenant to be cooperative. Just so you know, that conversation with the tenant, I've had it hundreds of times, and I say it in that very specific manner. So if you have a conversation with the tenant, I say it with that manner so that it incentivizes their cooperation basically from the beginning. And I'm setting expectations up front basically for them to be cooperative with the showings and basically letting them know what. And now in some cases, some of the tenants may say to you, "Hey, what happens if I don't show the property?" That's when you have the hammer conversation with them. Well, look, we would really not like for that to happen, meaning that we would prefer to go the cooperative way, because obviously I feel like if we all work together, we can come up with a resolution that works with everybody. But if you decided not to cooperate, here's what the owner has given me permission to do. Unfortunately, like, we would have to move forward with the unlawful detainer process, and you would be evicted 100%. Like 100%, like zero doubt in my mind.
And you just explain it not in like an even keeled, not like aggressive, like, I mean, unfortunately, if you did decide to utilize that strategy, our hope would be is that you don't do that, and that we remain cooperative and we come up with a solution that's mutually beneficial to all parties. At the same time, you certainly have free will and choice. So if you choose to do that, what
unfortunately
the next step would be is, unfortunately, we would have to go through the legal process, and what that's called is an unlawful detainer. And we facilitate these all the time. My intention in sharing this with you is not to generate fear. It's just to give you an accurate assessment of reality. That is a 30 to 45-day process that'll result with you being, escorted off the property and the locks change. And then just like be quiet. So like, I'm not trying to be like aggressive. I'm not trying to like fight with you. It's just like, this is what it is. I had a buddy of mine, he's a cop, and he was telling me, like, when he meets with people, he's like, look, there was this guy and he's being like really aggressive. And he's like, hey, I need you to get down on the ground. And the guy was like, he wasn't listening. He's like, he told him like 2 or 3 times. And then he's like, all right, well, you have a choice right now. The choice is you get on the ground on your own accord, or I'm going to take you to the ground.
Or I'll make you.
either like, but he didn't do it like, you know what I mean? Like that's
Very calm,
just,
yeah.
Just very calm, very clear.
So I have a challenge with that because, like, I get, wound up tightly. What do you have any suggestions at that point when you feel the
because
anger?
I think the wound, like it, when that happens, it's usually, I mean, it's you.
Yeah, no, I know it's me.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
just
but what I
saying,
mean
is
is
there
like
any?
I'm focused on myself. That's what causes the anger, because it's like, oh, well, you're not listening to me, or like, you're being aggressive with me, or you're calling me name. Like I was on a call with somebody the other day and he started yelling. I'm like, hey, I'm noticing that you're yelling. I'm not. You know what I mean? Like, are you okay? Like, is everything all right?
Jose did that to me.
Yeah. So it's, and that causes somebody to become like aware of what's happening for them. But like, I just am constantly reminding myself, I am not, the moment that I interject myself into like the deal, I'm not serving anybody. Like I'm there to help facilitate. Like imagine you were a seller and you knew that your agent lost their temper with your tenant. You'd be fucking furious. I would. 100%. I would be more mad at the fucking agent than I would the tenant.
For sure, because he ruined the situation. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know that can be a challenge. At the same time, it's like, it's part of our job is to be the calming force in transactions. Like they're dramatic enough without people infusing their own, us as representatives of, let's say, a seller in this instance, infusing my own like emotion. Here's what I would tell people. You ready? Get out of your feelings because there's no money there.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. 100%.
Here's what I would ask people. Was this conversation helpful to you guys? And do you guys have any additional questions about dealing with tenants and how to deal with tenants the proper way, basically?
And if you want to join EXP, do it.
I just, and I know it's too early for...
Then you have access to Aaron and Jose constantly.
I know it's a little early for takeaways, but what I get from the dialogues with Aaron and Jose is that they're demonstrating professionalism, and how they're doing that is obviously they're asking questions and are engaging people. And they're also demonstrating that, at least for me, my feeling is in that conversation as a recipient is that I'm being looked out for, I'm being informed, and also I'm being acknowledged, and I'm being protected. And in that experience, for me, it builds up the currency of confidence, which is the fuel of getting things done in the transaction. So that's the feeling I get. But now I kind of see the science behind it and the polite professional approach, which is respectful, and that in the majority of times, the honey approach, when it's delivered in that fashion with that level of professionalism, is generally going to work.
100%.
Yeah. I have a question. Let's say, so the owner, he has his son on a duplex on one of the units, and he's giving him discounted rent. How would that affect the price
of the property?
Yeah.
Would the tenant be vacating prior to the close of escrow, or
no? He's gonna be there till June of next year.
What city is he in?
In Ohio.
In Ohio. So there's technically, and he has a lease.
Yes.
Yeah. To be quite honest, Eric, like a lot of the price gets affected more on larger multifamily buildings, at least in Ventura County. And that's kind of the trend that I've noticed. So like, if you look 100%. At the comps, you'll see like fourplexes, bro, that sell like for 1.1 that produce like $5,000 worth of rent on a fourplex, and then you'll see like something that produces like $6,000 worth of rent, and it won't sell for that much over. So what I would try to do is I would just try to find a comp that has similar rents to that one as a potential comparable. But a lot of times most people factor in, like when I bought my big apartment complex at 25 unit, it was producing $25,000 a month, and I paid $4.4 million. It did not pencil out, but I knew that the market rent, once it was vacated, that the market rent would be would justify that price, basically. So a lot of people in Ventura County look at like the market rent. What's the actual market rent versus what do you have it rented for?
Which is crazy.
And some people may be willing just to say, oh, well, next June I'll basically get them out of the property and bring the rent up to market rent, basically, at that point.
I mean, it's cap rate plus, what type of work needs to be done to the property.
In a lot of the like four under, like the people there are like especially on
they're not really savvy, guys. Like that's what he's trying to say. Like people that are 4 under are like, doctors, accountants, dentists. They're not like fucking syndicators who are like doing
looking
huge
at cap
numbers.
rates, looking at the NOI.
Yeah, dude, they're not.
A lot of them, when they do their numbers, they don't even factor in like property management. They don't factor in vacancy expenses. They don't factor in maintenance expenses. They don't factor in any of that.
That's crazy.
Especially if an owner-occupied person is going to be living there, they may look at it just from a different perspective. Like, hey, look, like I'm going to be paying $4,000 a month versus $3,000 here or whatever.
I would also have a conversation.
Can you buy that property?
What do you mean?
No.
Okay. Well, if you can, I would try to, if it's a deal, try to figure that out.
Well, and I would have a candid conversation with the owner. So let's say he's like, because, he's trying to like keep his son in like a situation where he's paying dramatically below fair market rent. So I would say, hey, we can certainly put it on the open market. At the same time, I'm not saying it will. It may have an impact on how much we can get because of how much it's generating. I guess I'm curious, just so I'm clear, my intention in asking is not to try to be nosy in any way, just so I can kind of see where your position is at. If it meant that you would get, less money, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 less, if we had to have him in place for the next year prior to putting and selling it, would you be okay with that? Or would you go to your son and say, hey, like maybe I'll help you out in a different way? And then be quiet, because he may be like, yeah, like if it means you really think it'll mean that amount, you're like, potentially it could. It's like, all right, well, I'd be open to like maybe giving him some money for like 6 months on another place. I'm like, okay.
Or see if he'll do seller financing.
And then here's the thing, Eric, on 4 units or below, the financing is different than on a 5-unit plus. Meaning on a 5-unit plus, they are taking a look into the rents and they're looking at different like property performance metrics, like the DSCR, the debt coverage.
DSCR,
yeah, they're looking
easier
at that.
To get a loan.
Meaning, does it cash flow? No, but it would affect you more if the rent was substantially below market value in that situation than the 2-unit plus or 4-unit minimum or 4-unit.
He could potentially purchase that property with 10% down, and the seller could potentially finance that.
Yeah.
So, or you get a 1099 loan on the property and get the seller to use the equity to cross collateralize from your property that you own, Eric, onto this if it's a good deal. And then the dad is satisfied because if you work out the right deal with him, say, hey, like if you finance this, I'll make sure that your son stays as long as he wants at this rent. And then you just rent the other units at a higher rate to make up the difference. And if it's a good enough deal, it's worth holding on to.
Yeah.
All right, team, I got to bounce.
Same here, guys.
See you guys.
All right, guys. I hope that this call was helpful to you guys. And
hey, you don't have to say that, Jose. It was. Peace.